"You sure you brought the right antiques for show and tell, old-timer?" The voice, sharp with the undeserved confidence of youth, cut through the dry afternoon air. Cadet Miller, his uniform stiff and new, gestured with a dismissive flick of his wrist toward the long cloth-wrapped rifle Walter Hughes carried. "Or did you get lost on your way to the museum?" Walter Hughes, a man whose 80 years were etched into the lines around his eyes, offered no reply. His gaze remained fixed downrange, where heat shimmered off the dusty ground, distorting the distant targets into wavering apparitions. He stood amidst a sea of crisp digital camouflage, a quiet island of faded denim and worn leather in a world of rigid uniformity. The cadets, none older than 20, exchanged smirks and muffled laughs. To them he was an oddity, a relic invited to their state-of-the-art training facility for some ill-conceived community outreach day. "Cadet, watch your tone," a supervising sergeant barked, though his voice lacked any real heat. Sergeant Evans was a man who enjoyed the rigid order of his world, and this civilian intrusion was an unwelcome disruption. He saw a frail old man who needed to be managed, a box to be checked before he could get back to the real business of training soldiers. "Sir," Evans said, his voice now dripping with condescending formality, "we appreciate you coming, but this is a live-fire sniper range. It's not the safest place for a man of your—" The pause was deliberate, the implication clear. Walter's hands, gnarled with age but steady as stone, rested on his rifle. He finally turned his head, his pale blue eyes, clear and perceptive, meeting the sergeant's. He didn't seem angry or offended, he just seemed to be waiting. The silence stretched, made heavier by the rhythmic crack of rifles from an adjacent range. The cadets shuffled, their amusement giving way to a shared impatience. This was taking too long. It was a waste of valuable training time. Miller, emboldened by the sergeant's attitude, stepped closer. He pointed a finger at a small, faded patch on Walter's worn shooting jacket, a simple circle with a barely discernible design. "What's that supposed to be?" "Your bingo club's emblem." The confrontation hung in the hot, still air, a tableau of youthful arrogance and quiet, unyielding dignity. Walter's silence was his shield, his stillness a stark contrast to the fidgeting energy of the young cadets who surrounded him. They saw an old man, a bit of living history to be politely tolerated and quickly forgotten. They saw a relic, out of place and out of time. They had no idea they were standing in the shadow of a legend, a man whose quiet presence was about to shatter their understanding of what a warrior truly was. They thought they were the predators, circling their prey. The truth was far more dangerous. They had mistaken a sleeping lion for a stray cat, and the silence of the range was about to be broken by its roar. Sergeant Evans decided to bring the simmering situation to a head. He saw it as a teachable moment, not for the old man but for his cadets, a demonstration of the vast gulf between the wars of yesterday and the surgical precision of the modern military. He would let the old man take a shot, let him feel the weight and power of a contemporary rifle, and when he inevitably missed the distant target by a laughable margin, the cadets would have a good story, and the day could move on. It was a clean, efficient solution. "All right, boys, settle down," Evans announced, a smirk playing on his lips. "Let's give the gentlemen a chance to show us how they did it back in the day." He gestured magnanimously toward the firing line. "Pick a lane, sir. We've got targets set at 800 meters. Think you can see that far?" The cadets chuckled, the sound sharp and cruel. "Be careful you don't break a hip, Grandpa," Miller added, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Walter Hughes simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He walked past the row of sleek, high-tech sniper systems, their scopes like predatory eyes, their composite bodies a stark black against the beige landscape. He ignored the proffered rifles, the gear that cost more than a down payment on a house. Instead, he moved to an empty lane and slowly, methodically began to unwrap his own rifle. The cloth fell away to reveal not a museum piece but a tool. It was a heavily modified M21, a rifle that had seen its prime decades ago. The wooden stock was dark with age and oil, worn smooth in the places where his hands and cheek had rested for countless hours. It was an anachronism, a piece of history that had no place here. The cadets' amusement grew. They started talking amongst themselves, their voices carrying easily. "Is that thing even zeroed?" one asked. "My dad has one of those mounted over his fireplace," another chimed in. Miller leaned toward his friend. "I bet you $100 he can't even hit the backstop." Evans folded his arms, the picture of smug authority. This was playing out even better than he had hoped. The contrast was perfect, the old man with his wooden rifle against the cream of the crop of the Army's future, equipped with the deadliest technology on Earth. "Sir, are you sure you don't want to use one of our spotters?" the sergeant asked, the offer a thinly veiled insult. A spotter was essential for a shot at this distance, a second set of eyes to read the wind, calculate the drop, and confirm the impact. To shoot without one was an act of either supreme confidence or utter foolishness. Walter shook his head. "I'll be fine." His voice was quiet, a low rumble that seemed to be swallowed by the vast open space of the range. He didn't seem to hear the cadet's mockery, or if he did, it didn't register. His focus was absolute, his movements economical and precise. He settled onto the ground, not with the groan of an old man but with the fluid grace of someone who had made a home of the hard earth many times before. He adjusted the bipod, settled the stock against his shoulder, and peered through a scope that looked positively ancient compared to the digital marvels on the other rifles. The scene was set. The young arrogant cadets, the dismissive sergeant, and the silent old man. The tension was no longer about simple disrespect. It had become a challenge, a public test. Evans, seeing his plan crystallizing, raised his voice for all to hear. "All right, Mr. Hughes, the range is yours. Let's see what you've got." He turned to his cadets, a triumphant gleam in his eye. This strange interruption was about to become the most memorable and humbling lesson of their young careers, though the humility, he believed, would be all on the old man. He couldn't have been more wrong. As Miller's jab about the bingo club's emblem hung in the air, the faded patch on Walter's jacket seemed to draw all the light and focus. For the briefest of moments, the world of the noisy, sun-baked range dissolved for Walter. The mocking faces of the cadets blurred, replaced by a jungle, dense and suffocatingly green. The dry heat on his face became a humid stickiness that clung to his skin, and the distant crack of rifles was replaced by the deafening, intimate report of his own weapon, firing in the desperate quiet of a hidden position. He wasn't on a training range in the middle of America. He was perched in the fork of a kapok tree, the smell of cordite and wet earth filling his nostrils. Below him, a barely visible trail. In his memory, a younger man's face, pale with sweat and fear, looked up at him and nodded, a silent signal. That man had been his spotter, a kid from Ohio named Peters. The patch on his jacket, now a washed-out gray, had been a vibrant deep green then. It wasn't an official emblem. It was something their small four-man sniper team had designed themselves. A silent circle. The circle of trust. Each member wore one. Only two of them had come home. The memory was not a story. It was a physical sensation, a ghost of adrenaline and grief that flickered through him, as real as the rifle stock pressed against his cheek. It was over in a second, a flash of a past he never spoke of, a past represented by a simple, faded piece of cloth that these boys saw as a joke. Unseen by the drama unfolding on the firing line, a different kind of observation was taking place. From the cool, air-conditioned interior of the range control tower, Colonel Davenport was making his quarterly inspection tour. He was a man who believed in walking the ground, in seeing the training with his own eyes. He had his binoculars trained on Sergeant Evans's group, initially just to monitor the progress of the new sniper intake. He watched with a frown as he saw the cadets crowding around a civilian, their body language a clear display of mockery and disrespect. This was not the discipline he expected. He zoomed in, focusing on the old man. He saw the worn jacket, the quiet dignity, the ancient rifle. It was unprofessional of Evans to allow this circus. He was about to radio down and demand an explanation when his binoculars found the patch. He froze. The glass remained pressed against his eyes, his knuckles white. It couldn't be. He adjusted the focus, his heart starting to pound in his chest. A simple, faded circle. No words, no numbers. But the design, even washed out by decades of sun and wear, was unmistakable. He had seen it only once before, in a dusty classified file he'd reviewed for a Medal of Honor nomination, a file so heavily redacted it was mostly black lines. It was the unofficial insignia of a ghost unit from Vietnam, a special operations group that officially never existed. Davenport lowered the binoculars, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the old man on the firing line, who was now settling into his shooting position. "Get me the base commander," he snapped to his aide, his voice tight with an urgency that bordered on panic. The aide, startled, fumbled for the phone. Davenport snatched it from him. He knew protocol demanded he go through channels, but there was no time. He punched in the direct line to General Marcus Thorne, the installation's commanding officer. Thorne, the gruff voice on the other end, answered, "General, this is Davenport down at Range 4. Sir, you need to get down here, right now." "What is it, Colonel? Has there been an accident?" "No, sir, but there's about to be a catastrophe of a different kind," Davenport said, his voice low and intense. He watched as Sergeant Evans postured in front of the cadets, goading the old man. Sergeant Evans has a civilian on the line, an old man. The cadets are treating him like a mascot. A civilian, on the sniper range. Get him out of there, Colonel. That's a massive safety violation. Sir, that's not the problem, Davenport said, his eyes fixed on the scene below. The problem is who he is. He's wearing a circle patch, a green one, or what's left of it. The line went completely silent. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the tower's electronics. When General Thorne spoke again, his voice was transformed. It was stripped of all casual authority, replaced by a tone of cold, sharp alarm. Are you absolutely certain, Davenport? 100%, sir. Keep him there. Do not let him leave, Thorne commanded. I'm on my way. And Colonel, he added, his voice a deadly whisper, if your sergeant or his cadets do anything else to disrespect that man, I will personally end their careers. Understood. Yes, sir, Davenport replied, but the line was already dead. He looked down at the firing line where Walter Hughes was about to take his shot, oblivious to the storm of activity he had just unleashed. The witness had made the call. The cavalry was on its way. Inside the sprawling headquarters building 2 miles away from the sniper range, General Marcus Thorne slammed the phone down onto its cradle, the sound echoing through his cavernous office. His face, usually a mask of calm, strategic command, was pale. He stood bolt upright, his mind racing. A circle patch, a ghost, a legend he had only read about in sealed after-action reports that were the stuff of military mythology. These men were not supposed to exist. They were deniable assets from a forgotten war, snipers who operated so far outside the wire they were considered lost the moment they deployed. Angela, he barked into his intercom, his voice sharp and loud. Get me my car, now, and clear a path to range 4. Tell them it's a Code 1 emergency. His aide's voice crackled back, confused. Sir, a Code 1? Is it an active shooter? Worse, Thorne muttered to himself as he grabbed his cover from its stand. He strode out of his office, his movements radiating an explosive urgency that sent aides and junior officers scattering out of his path. He didn't just walk, he stormed through the corridors, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented intel from old files. He remembered the name associated with that patch, a name spoken in whispers at intelligence briefings, a name that had been personally classified by a president. Hughes, Walter Hughes, the man they called the Whispering Death, the operator credited with over 150 confirmed kills, including a North Vietnamese general, a shot taken from a distance so extreme it was still debated in classified circles, a man who had vanished after the war, refusing all medals, all recognition, wanting only to be left alone, and Sergeant Evans had him on a public range, letting a bunch of wet-behind-the-ears cadets use him for target practice. The general felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't just a matter of disrespecting a veteran. This was like letting a child scribble with crayons on the Mona Lisa. It was a sacrilege. As his car screeched to a halt in front of the headquarters building, he was already on his phone again, this time to the commander of the base's honor guard. Major, I want a full dress detail. Range 4, 5 minutes ago. He didn't wait for a reply. The car door slammed shut and the vehicle shot forward, its siren suddenly screaming to life. Down on the range, the atmosphere had thickened. Sergeant Evans, entirely unaware of the hurricane bearing down on him, decided to push his little lesson to its conclusion. Walter Hughes remained prone, his breathing slow and even, his focus absolute. He had not yet fired. He was waiting, reading the wind, feeling the pulse of the earth, becoming one with his rifle. This patience was, to the cadets, just more proof of his incompetence. Having some trouble there, old-timer? Miller's taunting voice cut through the air again. Need a calculator for the math? Or maybe a nap? Evans stepped forward, placing a hand on Miller's shoulder in a gesture of shared amusement. He then addressed Walter directly, his voice loud and authoritative, designed to humiliate. Sir, this is a multi-million-dollar training facility. We have a schedule to keep. Either take your shot, or we're going to have to ask you to clear the firing line. He let the threat hang in the air. The implication was clear. Perform or be removed. He took it a step further. Frankly, your presence here is becoming a disruption. If you're unable to demonstrate a basic level of proficiency, I may have to recommend you for a cognitive evaluation for your own safety. It was the ultimate insult. He was not just questioning Walter's skill, but his very mind, his right to be there, his grasp on reality. He was threatening to strip him of his agency, to have him labeled as a senile old man who couldn't be trusted. The other cadets shifted, some of them now looking uncomfortable. The fun had soured, curdling into something cruel. Miller, however, was enjoying it immensely. This was power, a public takedown of someone who didn't belong. He felt a surge of superiority. The old man was finished. He had no idea that it was his own world, and that of his sergeant, that was about to come to a definitive and brutal end. Just as Walter's finger began to tighten on the trigger, a sound pierced the air, a sound that did not belong on a firing range. It was the high-low wail of a priority siren, growing louder at an incredible speed. Every head, except for Walter's, snapped in the direction of the access road. A cloud of dust billowed into the sky, and from it emerged a black command vehicle, flanked by 2 military police SUVs, all of them moving at a speed that was both reckless and terrifying. The vehicles screeched to a halt just yards behind the firing line, doors flying open before they had fully stopped. General Marcus Thorne erupted from the command car, his face a thundercloud of pure fury. Close behind him, MPs fanned out, their expressions grim. But it was the vehicle that followed that stunned the cadets into silence. A transport truck from which a dozen soldiers in full dress uniform, the base honor guard, disembarked with crisp ceremonial precision. They moved with a purpose that was both chilling and awe-inspiring. The spectacle was so sudden, so overwhelming that Sergeant Evans and his cadets were frozen in place, their mouths agape. They were accustomed to the rigid hierarchy of the military, but this was a display of authority so far beyond their experience it seemed surreal. A 2-star general, the base honor guard, and a full MP escort, all descending on their sleepy range with the force of an invading army. They looked around, bewildered, searching for the cause of the commotion. They looked for a visiting senator, a foreign dignitary, anything that could explain the scene. Their eyes scanned past the old man, still lying motionless on the ground, completely oblivious to the chaos behind him. He was just part of the scenery. He couldn't possibly be the reason. General Thorne strode onto the range, his eyes locking onto Sergeant Evans. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was a low, dangerous blade of ice. "Sergeant, what, in God's name, do you think you are doing?" Evans, snapping out of his stupor, stammered. "General, I was unaware of your visit, sir. We are conducting sniper proficiency drills." The general's eyes narrowed to slits. "Your drills," he said, the words dripping with contempt, "are over." He then did something that defied all comprehension for the assembled cadets. He walked past the sergeant, past the entire line of stunned trainees, and approached the prone form of the old man. And as the entire range watched in silent, breathless disbelief, the general stopped, drew himself to attention, and rendered a slow, perfect salute. At that exact moment, a single deafening crack echoed across the range. It was not the sharp, high-velocity snap of the cadets' modern rifles. It was a deeper, heavier report, a sound with history in it. Downrange, 800 meters away, the dead center of the hostage target, a space no larger than a playing card, disintegrated. The shot was so impossibly perfect, so utterly silent in its execution until the final thunderous pronouncement of its arrival, that for a moment everyone forgot to breathe. Walter Hughes worked the bolt of his old rifle, the metallic click and punctuation mark, to the impossible feat. He remained on the ground, calm as if he had just shot a tin can off a fence post. General Thorne held his salute, his eyes fixed on Walter. The honor guard, on a silent command, marched forward and formed a rigid line behind the general, presenting arms in a display of ultimate respect. The cadets stood like statues, their minds struggling to process the scene. The mocking laughter, the casual cruelty, the arrogant superiority, it all evaporated, replaced by a profound and terrifying confusion. The general finally lowered his hand. He knelt down, not as a commander, but as a student approaching a master. "Mr. Hughes," he said, his voice now filled with a reverence that bordered on awe, "I am General Thorne. I am so sorry for the reception you've received. We had no idea you were on this installation." Walter slowly pushed himself up, accepting the general's offered hand. He looked at Thorne, then at the honor guard, and finally at the stunned faces of the cadets. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "It's just Walter," he said quietly. Thorne stood and turned to face the now trembling Sergeant Evans and his cohort. His voice, no longer quiet, boomed across the range, each word a hammer blow of judgment. "Do you have any idea who you have been speaking to?" he roared. "You stand on ground paid for by the sacrifice of giants, and you have no idea when one is standing among you. This is not just a veteran. This is Chief Petty Officer Walter Hughes, United States Navy. He was a foundational member of the SEAL teams, but that was just his day job." The general paused, letting the weight of the SEAL designation sink in, but he wasn't finished. During 2 tours in Vietnam, he was part of a special operations task force so secret most of this country's leadership still doesn't know it existed. Operating under the codename Ahab, he was a ghost. His official record is sealed, but let me tell you what I know. This man holds the 3rd longest confirmed sniper kill in U.S. military history. He once held off an entire enemy platoon for 3 days alone to allow his team to escape. He refused the Medal of Honor because, in his words, I was just doing my job. The patch you mocked, he said, his voice dropping to a furious whisper as he pointed at Cadet Miller, was worn by him and the 3 men who died next to him. He is a living legend. And you, he spat, his gaze sweeping over the cadets, you treated him like a stray dog. The silence that followed was absolute. The cadets stared at Walter Hughes, this quiet, unassuming old man, and finally saw him. They saw not a relic but a monument. The worn jacket, the ancient rifle, they were not signs of poverty or obsolescence. They were relics of a holy war, artifacts of a level of skill and sacrifice they could barely comprehend. Miller's face was ashen, the blood having drained from it completely. He looked as if he might be sick. The world, which had seemed so simple and well-ordered just minutes before, had been turned completely upside down. The god of their small universe, Sergeant Evans, was being publicly flayed by a higher power, and the old man they had mocked stood at the center of it all, a quiet, immovable force that had just reshaped their reality with a single perfect shot. General Thorne turned his wrath directly onto Sergeant Evans and Cadet Miller, who seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze. Sergeant, your complete lack of situational awareness, your failure to instill basic respect in your trainees, and your frankly disgusting treatment of a national hero represents a catastrophic failure of leadership. You are relieved of your command, effective immediately. Report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. You'll be lucky if you're still in this man's army by noon. Evans's face crumpled, the smug certainty draining away to be replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. He could only manage a choked, "Yes, sir." The general then fixed his stare on Miller. "Cadet, you have the bearings of a bully, not a soldier. You confused arrogance with confidence and cruelty with strength. You will be recycled. You're going back to day 1 of basic training. You will learn humility and respect from the ground up, and you will thank me for the opportunity every single day. Is that understood?" Miller, trembling, could only nod, his eyes wide with shock. Having delivered his judgment, General Thorne's demeanor softened as he turned back to Walter. "Sir, on behalf of the United States Army, I offer our most profound apologies." Walter Hughes held up a hand, a gesture that was not dismissive but calming. He looked at the shattered cadets, at the terrified sergeant, and his expression was not one of triumph, but of a deep and abiding weariness. "They're children, General," he said, his voice soft but carrying in the stillness. "They're taught to see the world through a scope, to identify targets. They don't know how to see the person yet." He looked directly at Miller, and for the first time the cadet saw not anger in the old man's eyes, but a flicker of something that looked like pity. "The hardest thing you'll ever have to learn," Walter said, his voice for them alone, "is that the person you are when you're not looking down that scope is the one that matters most. The uniform doesn't make you a man. Your character does. Remember that." The lesson, delivered not with anger but with a quiet, powerful grace, was more devastating than any punishment the general could have devised. It was a complete dismantling of their worldview, a gentle but firm correction that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As Walter spoke, his hand rested on the worn stock of his rifle near the trigger guard. His words triggered a final fleeting memory, not of the jungle this time, but of a quiet moment after a desperate battle. He was sitting in a tent, his hands still shaking from the adrenaline. Peters, the young spotter who would not survive the week, had been there. He had pulled a small, crudely carved wooden bird from his pack. "My dad made this for me," Peters had said, his voice barely a whisper. "He said it's a kestrel. They have the best eyes of any bird. He told me to keep it with me, to help me watch over my brothers." Peters had pressed the small bird into Walter's hand. "I think you should have it, Walt. Your eyes are better than any bird's." Walter had tried to give it back, but the boy insisted. A week later, Walter had carried Peter's body for 2 miles through enemy territory. He had kept the kestrel. It was still in a small box at his home, a reminder that the tools of war, the rifle, the scope, were nothing without the heart of the person wielding them. A symbol of a promise made to a fallen friend, a promise to always see the person, not just the target. The fallout from that day on the range was swift and decisive. Sergeant Evans was reassigned to a remote post in Alaska, tasked with inventorying cold weather gear, a career-ending move that served as a stark warning throughout the base. The entire class of sniper cadets, including a visibly humbled Miller, was ordered by General Thorne to complete a new mandatory 4-week course. It had nothing to do with shooting. The curriculum was military history, with a specific focus on the personal stories of decorated veterans. They spent their days in classrooms and their evenings writing essays on the meaning of honor, respect, and sacrifice. Weeks later, a small ceremony was held. Walter Hughes was invited back to the base, not as a guest but as the guest of honor. In front of the entire installation, General Thorne officially dedicated the sniper training facility in his name, the Chief Petty Officer Walter Hughes Precision Marksmanship Center. Walter, uncomfortable with the fanfare, accepted the dedication with a few quiet words of thanks, his humility a stark contrast to the massive honor being bestowed upon him. Several months after that, on a quiet Saturday morning, Walter was at a local diner, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. The bell above the door chimed, and a young man in civilian clothes walked in. He was muscular, his hair cut short. He hesitated at the door, then walked directly to the counter and stood near Walter. It was Miller. He looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. "Mr. Hughes?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Walter looked up from his paper. "Hello, son." "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you," Miller said, his words stumbling out, "and to say I'm sorry for that day. There's no excuse for my behavior." He looked down at his hands. "They made us study your record. What you did, I can't even comprehend it. You taught me a lesson that day, a bigger one than you'll ever know. It wasn't about shooting." Walter took a slow sip of his coffee. He gestured to the empty stool next to him. "Sit down, kid. Let me buy you breakfast." Miller sat, and for the next hour the old veteran and the young cadet sat and talked. Not about war, or medals, or impossible shots. They talked about life, about responsibility, and about the quiet burden of being a good man. It was a silent, respectful encounter, a closing of a circle, where the echoes of disrespect were finally replaced by the quiet tones of genuine understanding and peace. Thank you for joining us for this story from Veteran Valor Stories. If you were moved by the courage and character of Walter Hughes, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of unassuming heroes. Your support helps us continue to honor them.